Welcome back to Real Takes, where we are all movie love all the time. I'm Ann Stott, and we are coming to you from my couch. I realized, I don't watch movies sitting at my desk. I don't watch movies sitting in front of my computer. Why should I talk to you about movies from a desk or sitting in front of my computer? I thought that I should talk to you about movies where I watch the movies. This is where I watch the movies, which means that the cats will be making an appearance. Today, Trudy is starring in our episode. Trudy, do you have something you want to say to the people? No, she wants to sleep. She wants her lap. Trudy likes the lap. So today I was planning to talk about Kelly Reichardt, a director I love, whose movies I want everyone to see all the time. And then Putin decided to go rogue and, cause suffering and harm, invade a country, upset a delicate, problematic geopolitical balance, but a geopolitical balance nonetheless. And I just felt like I needed to choose a movie that spoke a little more to the current international mood. And so, as you know, we also follow the astrological calendar here. So I was looking at Pisces filmmakers, and I was thinking, okay, Pisces filmmakers who've made movies about war. And I thought, well, Bertolucci's a Pisces. He made The Conformist. He made The Last Emperor. And then I thought, oh, right, Robert Altman, one of my favorite directors, is a Pisces, and he made MASH, which is an incredibly pointed anti-war movie. And I was particularly excited about MASH because I was a huge fan of the TV show growing up. It was an early sign of my, burgeoning lefty anti-war politics. And the show was based on the movie. And also the actress Sally Kellerman passed this last week. Oh, bye, Trudy. And so it would be a nice way to honor her. Then I watched The Conformist and I watched MASH. And I have to say, there's so many upsetting sexual politics in both of those movies that I just didn't feel like I could give them the full movie love treatment that I like to give a film here. Don't get me wrong. I still love Robert Altman. I still love Bertolucci. And MASH is still an important movie in that it was made in 1968. The rating system had just been changed. War is shown in a much more gruesome, realistic way than it had been shown. Well, the operating room of war, they're not actually on the front, was shown in a much more realistic way than it had been shown. It's a much more pointedly political anti-war movie than many that had come before. It's where Altman kind of crystallized a certain cinematic style that's very important that I love. But there's a lot of harassment and abuse of women in this film, and it's casual and cruel at the same time. And it's sort of understood that this is how these guys get to blow off steam because war is absurd and dehumanizing and awful, and war is absurd and dehumanizing and awful, but that doesn't mean, in my mind, that then half the population gets to be dehumanizing and absurd and awful to the other half of the population, and absurd and awful to the other half of the population. And okay, coming back in to clarify a few things. First, I want to say that the misogyny is really big and sort of forefront in this film, but there are also some racism issues. It's set during the Korean War, and there's only really one Korean character in the whole film, and there are stereotypes going on there. And then, there are Black characters, but there are other problems, is the bottom line. The second thing is that when you talk about this stuff, part of what's important to look at is what you feel the point of view of the film is, right? And the filmmakers. And obviously that's a subjective thing, right? People can debate what the filmmaker was trying to do or have different feelings about what the filmmaker is trying to do. And sometimes you have to go off what the filmmaker said about the film to know what they were trying to do. But from my experience here, it's very clear that the point of view of the camera, the point of view that we're supposed to have is like, oh, look at these funny things these guys are doing to kind of have some fun to deal with how hard war is. And the abuse and harassment are not treated as abuse and harassment. And when the women try to speak up in any way, they're treated as hysterical or completely dismissed. So that is another layer. Sometimes you could say, well, men did treat women badly then, and they did. But how is it being depicted? What's the perception that's being used on that treatment? Affects how we experience it as an audience, right? The next thing I want to say is, if you're thinking, oh my God, this is just Anne being too political, just to let you know, you can go Google MASH movie sexual politics and a plethora of articles will come up about how we need to re-examine this aspect of this film, as important as it is. And then the last thing I just want to say is that people like to say things like, well, we can't judge work from the past by the standards of the present. And I'm here to say an emphatic, yes, we can. We absolutely can, because we evolve. That's what we do. And hopefully we become better people who treat each other with more respect and kindness. And then we can look back and see where we didn't treat each other with respect and kindness, or as storytellers, where we didn't treat all of our characters as full human beings in the story, where maybe we used certain kinds of characters or certain stereotypes to further the story for other characters who we decided were more important. We can absolutely do that because we learned from that, and that's part of how we continue to evolve. Now back to our process of finding the movie upon which we will shine a lot of movie love this week. Then I thought, well, maybe I should choose a movie about communism or, dictators. And then I thought that it might be better to kind of bring it closer to home. And so I remembered that Jonathan Demme, a Pisces filmmaker, made a remake of The Manchurian Candidate in 2004, starring Denzel Washington, Meryl Streep, and Liev Schrieber. And I rewatched it, and there's so much there to talk about. And it's not really an anti-war film as much as it is an anti-corrupt abuse of power film, which I think is relevant to where we are today. So, like I said, this is a remake, this film. The film was made, there was an original version in 1962, which was a John Frankenheimer film, and that was based on a novel written by Richard Condon. The 1962 screenplay was written by George Axelrod, and the movie starred Frank Sinatra. And the setup is that Frank Sinatra was a Korean War veteran who had been a prisoner of war. And he's back home, and through dreams and other experiences, he comes to believe that he was brainwashed by communists. He and his whole unit were brainwashed by communists. And one person in his unit is rising up through the political ranks, and the implication is that the communists have, infiltrated American politics with communism through brainwashing. Now, the 2004 version puts a slightly different twist on that. They changed a lot of the brainwashing techniques, and Denzel Washington plays a veteran of the 1991 Gulf War, Desert Storm, when we invaded Kuwait to stop Saddam Hussein from taking over Kuwait. And he has nightmares and other experiences that lead him to believe that he maybe had been brainwashed while in the war, kidnapped and brainwashed, and that his whole unit had been brainwashed. And Liev Schrieber plays another member of his unit who is now rising through the political ranks. When the movie starts, he's a congressman, and his mother, played by Meryl Streep, who's a senator in her own right, is angling for him to be the next vice presidential candidate. Now, it's a little less clear at first in this version who might have done the brainwashing, but it soon becomes clear that they've been brainwashed by a multinational corporation who wants to literally have their man in politics. So this becomes a very pointed critique of the situation we were in 2003 and 2004 when this movie came out, which is Dick Cheney, who had been on the board of Halliburton, a multinational corporation dealing in energy, as in oil and gas, was now the vice president of the United States, pushing us into a war that wasn't really justified, from which the companies with which he was affiliated would benefit astronomically. So we didn't even need creepy brain implant situations. It was all happening. And this movie kind of mirrored and critiqued all of that. So Jonathan Demme didn't make this film happen. The script came to him already written, and Denzel Washington was already on board. But then he decided to make this movie because he was very concerned about what was happening politically in the United States. And, you know, it's interesting because from a mainstream American narrative perspective, the obvious thing would have been to make the people doing the brainwashing the terrorists, right? Like the mainstream narrative from the 50s was like, we're under attack by communism. And the mainstream narrative now is like, we're under threat from terrorists, right? So it was a pretty shrewd political move to make the threat in the movie these power-playing multinational corporations that are in bed with politicians behind the scenes. And then from there, the film just works on all these different layers and levels. I mean, the brainwashing is this kind of heightened metaphor for how soldiers are manipulated and influenced. And then there's a big sort of media culture presence in the film. It's interesting because Jonathan Demme had said that they were trying to stay sort of one step ahead of what was happening in the early 2000s, but everything was happening so fast and it was sort of unfolding so quickly that, you know, he admitted by the time the movie came out, they were just trying to keep up. And the way the media culture is portrayed, it's interesting because, I mean, I remember that time and I remember the way the media was and wasn't engaging with what was really happening at the time. But our media culture has gone sort of so out of control since then that it definitely feels like that moment in time and not this moment in time. Not because the problems have changed, they've only gotten worse, but the tone has shifted in several different ways. But it's definitely a metaphor about the brainwashing of the media culture and the media's inability to deal with these problems. Like, why wasn't the media taking on the fact that Dick Cheney had a vested financial interest in taking us into this war that, you know, all our allies knew wasn't justified, right? And then there's a real blurring of the party lines in the film. Jonathan Demme was really clear that he didn't want to get into a partisan movie. So it's clear Meryl Streep's character is conservative and that Liev Schrieber is sort of trying to be independent by, you know, having a slightly more liberal take on things. But they literally never say the words Republican and Democrat in the whole movie because they're really trying to shine a light on the collusion between business and government. So this is a movie that's very much about calling out, you know, corrupt, behind the scenes, money influenced power mongering. And it does it successfully. And one of the reasons it does it successfully, or many of the reasons it does it successfully, is because of the incredible performances by all of the actors in this film. So, you know, Denzel Washington brings what he always brings, which is this like incredible combination of star power and craft that feels to me sort of Paul Newman-esque, right? Like, you just can't take your eyes off him. Like, he's a star, but then he's got all this depth and energy and intelligence, and, you know, he's just bringing it. And apparently Jonathan Demme said in one interview about the process of making the film that Denzel Washington said, like, bring me actors, like, I want people to work off of. And I'll talk about Liev Schreiber and Meryl Streep in a minute, but this film is just chock full of incredible actors, down to like some of the smallest roles. So the supporting cast is Jeffrey Wright, always incredible. Bruno Ganz, who had just finished shooting, playing Hitler in Downfall, which is a phenomenal film if you haven't seen it. Simon McBurney, star of stage and screen in England. Jon Voight, Academy Award winner. Zelchko Ivanek, who is someone whose name you probably don't recognize, but if you go look him up, you'll be like, that guy. Anne Dowd, who's just won a bunch of awards for her performance in Mass. Vera Farmiga, always so heartbreaking. Dean Stockwell, and then fun connection, Kimberly Elise, who we just talked about a few movies ago, because she was in Set It Off. So just this like rich cast. Every scene has actors in it, just bringing so much to their roles. And then Liev Schreiber as the politician rising up through the ranks. Now, I had known Liev Schreiber in the 90s. He was making sort of smaller independent films, one of which we talked about here, Walking and Talking, which is the first film by Nicole Holofcener. We didn't focus on it, but I've mentioned it. And then another favorite indie of mine, Day Trippers, with Hope, oh God, what just happened? Hope Davis, I hope I got that right, and Parker Posey and Ann Mira. Great little indie movie. And he's always so compelling. And then there's Meryl Streep. And so she plays this sort of she plays a senator, and a power playing senator who's descended from a tycoon, and she is just tearing up the screen with this role. And I know that now her role in The Devil Wears Prada is much more famous than this role, but this role came a few years earlier, and what she is doing as this power player who just has no time on her watch for anything except what she thinks should happen next is stunning. It's incredible to watch. And, you know, at the time, everybody compared her performance to Hillary Clinton because, again, sexism and, you know, culture can be lazy, and she wore pantsuits and her hair was kind of short. But the truth is, she said, like, she felt like she got to play a General Patton. And she actually demurred in some interviews to say, like, who she was basing her performance on, because she knew America would be mad at her. But years later in an interview, Jonathan Demme said that she was thinking about Dick Cheney. Now, her mannerisms are very different than Dick Cheney, but in terms of this sort of shrewd, determined power playing, that's really the energy that's coming through in the film. So the acting in this movie is just off the hook from start to finish. Highly recommend revisiting Jonathan Demme's The Manchurian Candidate, or so many of Jonathan Demme's films. He came up making music videos, and then is responsible for one of the most important concert films ever, which is Stop Making Sense with the Talking Heads, which I love, which has been on my list to talk about for ages. And then most famously made Silence of the Lambs and Philadelphia are probably his two biggest movies, but had a long career making, you know, lots of movies on different topics and different genres. And he actually said that, you know, in some ways for him, he had always thought that he would revisit the characters from Silence of the Lambs again, because he really loved shooting that film. Like, he apparently really loved making the film and working with those actors and working with those characters in that story. And when that didn't happen, he sort of approached making the Manchurian Candidate the way he approached making Silence of the Lambs. It is a psychological thriller about a very different subject matter. It's a political psychological thriller. And at the same time, he got to sort of talk about some of the things he was really worried about in our politics at that time. So much going on in this movie. Totally worth the rewatch. If you've seen it, let me know what you think. If you haven't seen it, go watch it, come back, let me know what you think. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Wait, I have to say one more thing. So I just started this episode talking about Putin and wanting to talk about war. So I want to say, one, that I am not equating, the Iraq war with Putin's invasion of the Ukraine. There are many, many ways these two situations differ. Although I don't have a problem with equating Dick Cheney and Putin. Since Dick Cheney was the driving force behind increasing our torture practices around the globe and our surveillance of our own citizens and people outside the country. So I don't actually really have a problem with that at all. But I just want to say that I'm aware that our country's politics are very different than the politics of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. And I just wanted to get away from saying like, oh, Putin, Russia, bad, this terrible thing happening far away, and kind of shine a light on maybe where our country has engaged in some problematic practices. And I just want to say that I really hope that what's happening right now in Ukraine is not the beginning of the kind of decades-long debacle that our country created in Iraq and also in Afghanistan. So I am wishing peace for everyone in the world. I am sending peace and love to the people of Ukraine, and I will see you next Wednesday. Thanks for watching Real Takes. Hit the subscribe button below so the algorithms will tell you when new episodes are out. And if you want to support Real Takes, please visit my Patreon page where you can join at any tier from $2 to $100 per thing I make. The $15 tier is specifically about supporting Real Takes, and you'll get behind-the-scenes information and be thanked in future videos. See you next Wednesday.